All right. Hello. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thank you everyone for joining. It is great to see so many people here from around the world. I'm seeing all of the different locations in the chat. My name is Knar Hovakimyan. I lead Responsible AI at Grammarly, and I'm excited to be your host for today's session on making sense of 2025 AI trends. So we'll get started in just a minute. But before we do, we have a bit of housekeeping. So first of all, just due to the size of the webinar, all attendees are automatically muted. You can enable closed captioning. So you just have to click the CC button at the bottom of your webinar window, and you can see an example right here on this slide. And then we would love to hear from you throughout the session. So please leave any comments or questions in the Q&A widget. We have a team working behind the scenes that will help answer any of your questions. And we'll have some Q&A at the very end. And don't worry about taking notes. We are going to follow up with a recording of the whole session, so you won't miss anything. All right, so today we're going to focus on the 3 AI trends that we believe will have the biggest impact on companies, teams, and ways of working in 2025. So these are Agentic AI, ROI of AI, and Responsible AI. The truth is, you can't know everything about the future of AI, and you won't 100% understand all of these things at the end of the session. But really, our goal is to help leaders build confidence in understanding and approaching these trends, enough so that they can make informed decisions for their businesses and teams. So Tim Sanders, who's one of our speakers today, told me there's something known as the 30% rule, which is that you only need to understand 30% of how a technology works to actually map an effective strategy for the future. So I don't know if we're giving you exactly 30%, but our goal is to give you that kind of foundation today. So I'd love to introduce you to our other speakers for today, Tim Sanders and Luke Behnke. Tim, we're super excited to have you. Do you mind introducing yourself to our audience?
Absolutely, Knar. Tim Sanders. I serve as Vice President of Research Insights at G2. We're the world's largest review marketplace for software, and we appreciate our relationship with Grammarly, who rocks several categories on G2. I'm also an executive fellow at Harvard Business School advising the Digital Data Design Institute. Our charter at D Cubed, as we call it, is to democratize artificial intelligence for business people. So it's a natural for me to be in a venue like this, and I greatly appreciate it. Finally, I'm the author of the book Love is the Killer App, which some of you might have read a few years ago.
Thank you, Tim. And Luke, we're so excited to have you from the Grammarly side. Could you introduce yourself as well?
Absolutely. Hey, everybody. It's great to see so many people from so many different places here on this call. I'm Luke Behnke. I lead our enterprise and trust product team here at Grammarly. I've been here for about a year now, loving it. Things are super fun here at Grammarly at the moment. It's an exciting time to be, for all of us, I think, to be digesting what's happening with AI and where it's going next. Before Grammarly, I've worked at a number of B2B software companies, namely a company called Ironclad that built AI for lawyers and legal contracts. And then prior to that, a company called Zendesk that has also been doing AI, building actually AI customer support agents long before we had the amazing technology around LLMs and generative AI that we have today, but also providing kind of help desk customer support software. So that was a fun ride, but excited to be here and talk about these trends that are emerging for next year.
Thank you both. So there's a ton to get to today, so let's jump right in, starting with Agentic AI. Agentic AI is probably one of the hottest topics in AI right now, and there's a good reason for that, which is that we're starting in 2025, really moving to a place where AI is operating more independently, making decisions more independently, and analysts believe that by 2028, 15% of work decisions will be made by AI agents. and a third of enterprise software will include agentic AI. So in 2025, we're really going to start thinking about what does this look like? How's it going to develop? How do we integrate this into our businesses? But there's so many different definitions floating around, so many different conversations. Tim, I'm hoping you can help us get started by telling our audience a little bit about what agentic AI is and how we think about that.
Thanks. The shorthand definition is an AI agent is a virtual team member that performs actions on our behalf. Full stop. And that's very different than how we've experienced artificial intelligence, which largely is, to the point of this book, a prediction machine, which took information that you have and gave you information you didn't have, largely in terms of a suggestion. The more complicated definition is it's a very complex system. Agentic is that can reason, break down tasks, use external tools, and perform actions. Here's how I think about it, Knar. When you think about AI, don't think like this is an agent, that's not an agent. Think of it all on a continuum. I call it the Waze to Waymo continuum. Think about the app Waze. With Waze, you get behind the wheel of your car and you prompt Waze to give you turn-by-turn directions to the airport, which was a revolution when you think about it. It's just awesome. However, Waymo's different. Waymo, you get in the back seat, you pull out your iPad, turn on Netflix, and you let Jesus take the wheel. In other words, Waymo drives you. That's why when you think about how big autonomous driving could be, it is literally 100x what you think of navigation systems as possibly being. This is what the continuum looks like. Up until now, people are calling agents chatbots and co-pilots, which make suggestions to you. Intelligent assistants added a layer of reasoning so that not only did it make a suggestion, it could do a rudimentary task for you, say pushing a Calendly link to schedule a meeting, or pushing a lead gen or some kind of deflection link so that customer service could create a case. But really, it's still just rules based. Task agents, which has come on the scene in the last year or two, can actually perform a task for you, like creating a post, scheduling it in a content management system for release. That's soup to nuts, pretty exciting. But what we're really excited about in the research world is the rise of process agents. They can do an entire process working across departments from end to end. And in this case, you're actually able to add more brain power, horsepower to a working team. And that's why it looks like this is going to grow 40 or more percent CAGR every year and literally be 50x bigger in 12 years than it is today. And some argue bigger than SaaS. But at the end of the continuum is the system of agents. And this is where it's going to go in the next 5 years or so. And this is where a variety of these virtual team members can swarm and collaborate to deliver your goals, not just solve your problems. And that's a really exciting future for all of us.
Yeah, I agree, by the way, Tim. Like this continuum, I think is a super helpful way of looking at it. As I think about like just sort of helping everybody, I saw a chat that like maybe, or a Q&A that maybe we're not all familiar with all of these terms. I think it's just really important just even to maybe just define at a very basic level a little bit more about what agentic AI is. This is really about capability that goes from this interaction, like Tim said, where we used to have to ask a lot of questions to, being able to actually start to program things to happen autonomously without our support,
Right.
and being able to kind of take these everyday workflows that we all do. Sometimes we don't even think about it. We just do it every day. We spend time on these repetitive tasks. And it's really interesting to start to think about, is there a way that we could automate this? Actually, like one that came into my head yesterday, actually, I was in our San Francisco office at Grammarly. I was about to commute home, and every night I text my wife what time I'm going to be arriving. And it feels like there should just be, I should be able to, and I probably could spend a little time programming an AI agent that would say every time Luke gets in his car at the end of the day, we should look at what the map says and text his wife the time he's going to be home, right? Those sorts of things. But now imagine applying those to all the different things that happen at work every day, which I think there are so many of these. If we start to actually step back and kind of inspect, what are we doing each day day, that maybe we could move on this spectrum more towards, can we start to automate this task? Can we even start
Yeah,
to automate this wider process? And LLMs, large language models, right? This capability that to actually kind of reason, right? Before we used to have to program a lot of if this, then that sort of logic.
yeah,
Now you can kind of feed these systems some information, some preferences, and some plain kind of written instructions, and the
yeah,
system can actually start to connect multiple kind of pieces, multiple systems even together, to take action. And I think that's just like really exciting to think about, as each of us are kind of keepers of process within our
yeah,
organizations, and can we actually rethink some of that process incrementally? That also seems maybe a little bit overwhelming for people. They're like, I'm just trying to keep my head above water in my day to day. And I think that's where, not to do too much of a plug for Grammarly, but I think it's tools like Grammarly do help. We're also thinking about that on your behalf. And, in many ways, we see our solution, our revision grammar error correction tool, as kind of one of those original AI agents. It followed you where you're working in the sites that you allow it to work. And it just popped in when it felt like, hey, there's something wrong
right.
here. Let me see if I can help. And that's really just like something that we've been working on honing for 15 years. Now thinking about doing that across so many more kind of tasks that we're all doing each day at work or at school.
Yeah.
I think it's really exciting.
Let me give you a plus on that too, Luke. When I was looking at some research in the Google Docs world, and when you're an owner of a Google Doc, you can spend up to 30% of your time in a Google Doc approving suggestions. Okay, so when you think about the difference between traditional chatbots and agentic chatbots, the traditional chatbot makes a suggestion. The agentic one performs the action for you. I was just looking at a piece of research yesterday from Upwork. They found that 70% of employees at companies who bought ChatGPT for everybody said that ChatGPT actually created more work for them than it solved for. Why?
Interesting.
Because they had to manage the suggestions, cut, copy, put something into production. Agents are going to come along and actually be a gas pedal that we can put our foot on at work, as opposed to a spark plug that starts something.
Yeah, so this is going to be a big development, right? So it's a huge technology that people can take advantage of to really increase efficiency. But it's also a big change. It's a big technology to put trust in. And
Yeah.
I'm wondering, what can leaders and their teams be doing right now to prepare for this? Luke, what do you think?
Yeah, it's a great question. And in fact, anytime something like this word agentic has sort of popped up, and I think we're all probably seeing it in articles, LinkedIn's everywhere. And for some, there's excitement, and for others, it's like, oh my gosh, yet another thing. Like I'm just figuring out, how to prompt a chatbot to get the things done that I wanted to do. So where to start? I think a couple things. First, there are people inside of your organization. If it's not you, someone on your team, someone on an adjacent team, who are starting to play around with this technology. There are a lot of these kind of open source kind of AI agent builders. There's more and more of this capability being rolled out into software tools that we're all using. I would really think about finding those early adopters, and really like using them as people who can help evangelize this technology and teach what's possible. I think about
Mm-hmm.
like my kids when they first picked up an iPad. They weren't afraid to click any of these buttons. They weren't afraid that something could go wrong. I could break this thing. They just start clicking all the things. They start doing natural behaviors. And suddenly they were figuring out how to kind of maneuver this system. I think if we take a little bit of that mindset and think like, maybe there is a piece of a process that I could start to automate through some tool that's out there and to play around. But find the early adopters. There are so many different tools out
Yeah.
there that people can use, and really think about that employee experience. Employees will use the least. They will follow that path of least resistance to get done what they need to do. And if they start to see and envision, hey, this looks better for me, not something that I was told I have to follow, but like, oh, this is really working for me. They will find
Yeah.
more and more ways to move that technology forward. And I think the other thing, I talked about a lot of these things that you can start to automate for yourself, for your team. They're kind of hiding in plain sight. And if you start to think
Mhm.
about the things you can do, an example at Grammarly is we've been doing a lot of hiring, and we were thinking about our job descriptions, and so much of it is someone's sends a template for a job description that has all the Grammarly boilerplate in it, and usually you get sent like an out-of-date template. Somebody else has actually updated all of that stuff. And then we're hiring, say, an engineering role, of which there are many examples in the on the internet about what would be qualifications for this role. Could we think about just automating that with some simple prompting, and that goes out and looks at our current job descriptions on our Grammarly website, pulls in all of the standard
Mm.
boilerplate itself, then starts to really say, what is the qualifications we expect based on what you've prompted me about the title of this job, the level of this job. It could even go look at LinkedIn and pick some of that information. And so that was just a simple one that we worked with our HR team to build. And that's just an example of like one of those things hiding in plain sight as we open
Yeah.
up, hundreds of job roles in a quarter or a year. Can we just make that process easier for everyone?
Absolutely. If I could add one quick thing too, I was just on a call with the team from Agentforce and Salesforce yesterday, and one of the things they're seeing that creates trust right away is to start with the pain. If you feel enough pain, you will find the trust. So the best way to think about it is write down 4 things right now that you wish you didn't have to do 500 times this week. If you identify where you're in debt at work, you identify the candidates where you're willing to take a great leap. Like me personally, keeping up with AI news, that's why I created my first agent, Tim GPT. All it does is read about 70 newsletters on my behalf to tell me the 4 things I shouldn't miss based on a document I gave it of the best 100 things I read last year. And it works like a charm.
Thank you both. A lot of interesting things coming up with agents, but I do want to make time for our other trends today. So let's shift over to talking about the ROI of AI. So this is something that a lot of companies are currently grappling with. So with Agentic AI, we're talking about kind of a net new thing, something we're going to see a lot of new development in. With ROI of AI, we're talking about how have we been already using this AI technology, but how do we actually understand how effective it is? So what we're seeing is a lot of leaders acknowledge that AI has a lot of potential, that it's very powerful, but most of them actually struggle to quantify that and measure the value of this technology. So Tim, I'm going to kick things off with you here. What do you see, where do you see most companies in their ROI journeys today?
They're stuck trying to measure productivity. The problem, and I've interviewed over 40 chief financial officers, I should call them chief frugality officers. The problem is individual productivity doesn't equate to organizational productivity. I might save 30% of my time with a Copilot code generator as an engineer, but I might go watch TikTok with the extra time that I save. You just don't know. So productivity is how we try to sell AI to companies, but that's not how they should recognize it. Here's my philosophy. If you measure utilization of AI, how often do you use the tool, the task you bought it for, that will signal to you your return on investment. It's called quitting costs. Most companies that churn when they have AI, they're not going to some competitor, they're going back to the status quo. So if we can go to the next slide, if we learn how to really manage utilization to make sure whether we're the seller or the buyer that we're measuring how often are they utilizing the tool, that will signal the value creation because now you can connect it to the same metrics you've been using for years, like lifetime value or like customer acquisition costs. So that's the first thing I talk about. There's one more slide up here. I'll just demonstrate it from G2 data here. So this research is, we went out and talked to leaders about chatbot investments, and they said, listen, we need to get our money back in 6 months. In other words, 6 months into the process, we need to be, in the profit. but it's currently taken almost 8 months. And we were looking at like, what are the levers that could get you to 6 months faster? And they said, well, how about we go live faster? That risks quality, hallucinations, all kinds of issues when you try to accelerate how quickly you put it into the wild. But the one lever that changes everything, you're looking at this number here, 62.2% like adoption of the chatbot by the end user. If you took that number from 62% to 80%, the 7.96 average goes to a little bit more than 5 months. It solves it. So if we laser focus on both sides on utilization, we get to value so much more quickly. And I'm going to tell you, don't assume just because you give them the AI, they would use it. My favorite story, Henry Ford's first big corporate customer for the Model T was the US Postal Service, but they had a problem. And the problem was that Postal Service delivery people were using horses to pull the Model Ts for years because the horses were quieter. So we need to really obsess about utilization. It's never the tool, it's us.
And Luke, on the Grammarly side, we've devoted a lot of energy on AI ROI. What are your thoughts in this area?
Yeah, we've invested a lot in measuring the ROI of Grammarly because our customers have, and prospective customers have asked us, have demanded it. Like, we are out of the age of, oh my gosh, this technology is so cool, and I want to try it, and I want to run all these pilots, right? We saw the data about how few of these sort of pilots actually end up getting into production organization wide. And it's not for lack of interest. It's just because it's very hard to measure today. And so something that we've felt very firsthand at Grammarly, and something I recommend to everybody on this webinar, is you should demand of your vendor, your software vendor, your AI tooling vendor, to help you come up with an ROI measurement, return on investment measurement, that is defensible. It's inspectable. You can understand the inputs that went into it, and you can really feel confident in presenting that business case to your executive leadership team, to your CIO or CFO who may be asking, why do we have all these tools? Do we really need them? To your all the people internally that might be asking, is it really worth the investment? Is this tool significantly different than that tool? Your software vendor should provide that information directly to you. You should not be left on your own to try to make sense of that. And so at Grammarly, that started with like surveying business users about their experience. And it's really transitioned to us actually being able to measure the quantitative impact of using Grammarly on your day. Does it actually help you get more done? Does it help you be a more effective communicator? We've come up with a number of, again, inspectable, understandable metrics that people can look at and say, oh, wow, look at that difference. That clearly, that quality difference in my writing or my communication must be impacting some of my metrics. And we've even allowed some customers and prospects to run A/B tests of Grammarly. Some groups get Grammarly, some get a version of Grammarly that's basically not running. And we can look at the difference over a multi-week period in terms of performance. That is not science fiction. These tools should be able to help you actually understand, is it being utilized? First question, like Tim said, and then is it having an impact on the things that I set out to do? Now, you have to be very clear on what you set out to do with this tool, of course, as Tim mentioned, but we are seeing that trend where it's on us to help our customers and prospective customers make an ROI case study. Otherwise, all these AI pilots will just sort of fade away as people go back to doing what they were doing before.
Absolutely. And yeah, I'm hearing, so we need to, or business leaders really need to understand quantitatively what's going on with the AI, how effective it is. Vendors can and should help business leaders do this. I want to jump back for a minute, Tim, to what you were saying about utilization, and that this is one of the most pragmatic steps that leaders can take right now. Anything to add there?
Absolutely. So on the ownership side, like if you own an AI solution, you're trying to drive more utilization, not only should you make it part of every problem you're trying to solve, we should also make it part of how we give annual reviews. In other words, there's companies that I've been studying that make AI transformation part of how they see the next generation of leaders inside a company. So we've got to incentivize it, not just provide it. Just the other day with my team, we were simply trying to figure out what should be the next few G2 reports we should write. So we used that as an opportunity to say, okay, let's go to Perplexity Pro. Let's find the 10 most media-cited reports in our category, and then let's identify for each one of those reports the 4 statistics that got the most sharing on social media. We provided a context window for how they might be able to get to that data, and it came back immediately with a start list for us. And then all of a sudden, the team began to say, well, there's other things I could begin to use Perplexity Pro for. So sometimes as a leader, if you go first and you use it in your collaborative sessions, it can spark people to realize this is an incredible tool. But at the end of the day, we've got to make it part of how we assess people's performance, because the reality is people with AI will do much better in the market, in competition, than people that don't use it. So we need to incentivize it, just like we do incentivizing any other best practice.
Absolutely. And I want to make sure we make it to our last trend, but any final thoughts on ROI of AI before we move on?
The only
Last thing
thing,
oh,
go
go
ahead,
ahead, Tim.
Luke. No, you go ahead, man. I
All right.
insist.
Yeah, I was just going to say we're going to post in here in the chat in a bit. We created a framework. We kind of open sourced it for companies of how to think about analyzing AI tools that they might be considering. It involves a compliance sort of set of questions you should be asking to make sure this meets the needs of your organization's security privacy concerns. You know, is it a quality tool? Is it trustworthy? Also gets into employee experience and making sure you understand kind of key use cases and what the employees are going to do with it. And then finally, how to sort of measure impact across a number of fronts. So we have a framework for this that we've done a number of other webinars and made some content on, and we'll be posting some information on that for people to look at.
That's great. That's great. Hey, the only thing I'd add here, Knar, is that I looked at research of who did well in getting their money back and who didn't do well. And here's what I learned. If you start with a business problem and work backwards to go find an AI solution, you're more likely to get ROI than if you find an AI solution that you love, write a check for it, and then go try to find a problem it can solve, which was what too many companies did with ChatGPT.
All right, Tim, I think I'm going to pass it over to you for our last trend to host.
It is my absolute pleasure. In this last point here, I'm going to take over the hosting duties because Knar is our responsible AI expert. And while responsible AI focuses on ethical AI use, most executives are interested in it as a competitive differentiator. And why they see that's important, few, and in fact, only 11% of executives say their companies have implemented fundamental RAI capabilities. That's responsible AI. Knar, similar to Agentic AI, I think our audience would benefit from a clear definition of what responsible AI is.
Yeah, absolutely. So I really like to think about RAI as the intentional development and use of AI and informed decision making around how we build and adopt these technologies. So it's really about thinking critically about what you're trying to achieve through using or developing an AI product, understanding what are the risks, what are the potential impacts, what's appropriate for your use case or not, and then making sure you control for those risks as much as possible so that you make sure that the AI does what you want it to do and it doesn't do what you don't want it to do. And at Grammarly, we have split this up into 5 pillars of responsible AI that we like to think about. So I'll quickly go through those. First, we think about transparency, right? So users should understand how AI systems work so that they're able to make informed decisions about using AI. They should understand how these systems interact with their data and what the risks of these systems are. Then there's fairness and safety. So this is more around the actual performance of these models, which all should be designed to produce quality output, to avoid bias, avoid hallucination, or other unsafe outcomes. Then we have user agency, where we believe that users should be in control of their experience when using AI. So they should be able to have some control over what the AI does, again, of how their data is handled. And this goes hand in hand with transparency, right? They need to understand that they're interacting with AI and how that AI works in order to exercise that control in an informed way. So these two are highlighted also. I think these are some of the most important factors because if you give users transparency and agency, they're then able to use AI responsibly for themselves. As developers, we can't foresee every possible risk and situation. So we have to make the AI as safe as possible, but then we also need to enable our users to adopt the AI safely. We also have accountability. So this is, again, just taking responsibility over AI products, the performance of these products, making sure that they meet standards and avoid negative impacts. And finally, privacy and security. Of course, people trust AI with their most sensitive personal and business information, and developers need to protect users from bad actors and protect their data. Yeah, so this is how we think about responsible AI here.
So help me understand how responsible AI is different from concepts like ESG and diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging.
Yeah, I think RAI, in a lot of ways, it's not tied to any one specific outcome to say, like, this is what a responsible AI system looks like, and this is what we need to develop. It's about the practices that anyone takes when using AI. Again, to be not to use the word that's in the name of it, but to be using it responsibly, right? So it's about what practices do we have in place when we're developing AI? Do we have standards for the kind of data that we use? Do we have standards for how we evaluate the product? What performance is good enough? When do we measure this? How do we respond to user issues? It's about this process. But ultimately, each individual and each company decides for themselves, like, what are the standards that they want to stand by? And this depends on their use case, their product, their brand. So it's really the practice of how we work with AI and making that intentional and informed.
So talk a little bit now about how companies use responsible AI as an innovation and speed enabler.
Yeah, I think a lot of the time people can think about responsible AI as something that slows them down. And I think that can be true. Let's say if we were just focusing on fairness and safety and saying we need a model that is 100% unbiased and 100% accurate before we deploy it. That's impossible. That's never going to happen. There's no existing text or person or anything that is 100% accurate and unbiased, right? So I think we need to think about what's actually the most important. And again, this is why I highlight these transparency and user agency areas, because I think when you put the control in people's hands to think about their use case, their deployment of AI, they're going to be able to ensure that they use it safely. And I think when you give users that control, especially as we're moving into that agentic age, they're much more likely to want to adopt it quickly, right? Especially if businesses are using these products for riskier use cases where accuracy is really important. That transparency, that control, that accuracy being as high as we can get it, that privacy and security being top of the line, that's going to make the difference between do they adopt it quickly or not.
That's great. I think this is all, I mean, I learned a lot, from that. And obviously I can see why it's so important for every organization, not just those that market and sell artificial intelligence, but everybody who utilizes it and puts it into workflows.
Absolutely. Thank you, Tim. I could talk about responsible AI all day, but I do want to save time for our Q&A. Before we dive into that, I do want to give folks an opportunity to learn a little bit more about how Grammarly is helping customers navigate these trends confidently in 2025 and beyond. So Grammarly has been working in AI for over 15 years, really trying to figure out how do we build a responsible AI system that improves communication in enterprises. And we would love to show you more about how we improve productivity and business outcomes. So if you want to talk to a member of our teams, please select yes on the poll you see on your screen. Okay, and with that, let us move to our Q&A. And Luke, I have a question for you to start with. What are ways teams can identify the best AI use cases for their needs?
Good question, and I've been trying to answer as many of the Q&A chats, by the way, as well. I think I've knocked out maybe 10 of them, but there are a lot more, so
Good for
I'll keep
you.
doing that. Yeah, double multitasking here, but yeah, as far as identifying, the best AI use cases for their needs, actually, a theme I think that's been happening in this Q&A here is like, is this really an agent or is this an automation? And I think it's an interesting set of questions. I mean, perhaps some of what we're talking about with agentic AI has been done for a long time or is being done already within various workflow automation tools. And so actually that's another great place to start, is kind of what are the existing automations that your business is running on. Almost all of our kind of enterprise software vendors have some set of automations that we've been building, for automating various things. But I think the key innovation when we think about LLMs is the ability to be able to take in much more knowledge and context than prior systems had, and then unlock a whole new set of skills that were probably not possible before. For instance, being able to actually not just follow a set of if this, then that logic, but instead actually reason about the appropriate next best action. So one place to start, as we said before, was thinking of looking at early adopters who are playing around with AI technology in your organization. Another place to start, as we spoke about before, is thinking about all those things you do every day that you just wish you didn't have to do, and wondering, ask yourself, I love Tim's idea, just to write down a few of them and see, can we do this a better way? But another one would be to look at what you're already doing within kind of workflow automation tools, of which there are dozens that we probably all interact with each day, and think about, if I actually could have this system reason a little bit, and make better actions on my behalf, could we do something different that would be meaningfully impactful? So those are some suggestions off the top of my head.
Thank you, Luke. And I will pass another question over to you, which is, how should businesses test the security of the AI tools that they're considering? So how can they increase the organizational comfort level with the privacy of the data while incorporating AI tools?
Yeah, I can take this one quickly, and Knar, please feel free to add on to it if you have thoughts. Number one, and I want to make very clear, when we think about security, data privacy, those are two really important but somewhat unique concerns. Data privacy is, where is my data? Is it being stored in a certain location, in a server somewhere? Where is that server? Are you holding on to my data? And probably most importantly, are you or any of your sub-processors training on my data? If you're working with an AI vendor that does not give you control over training of your data, we start at Grammarly default off for our enterprise customers. In fact, enterprise customers cannot even turn it on today. There are some capabilities where it may make sense for them in the future to turn on training, because it will make our AI capabilities better. But you should be able to really inspect, where is my data going and is it being trained on? Vendors need to give you those controls and that transparency. Those are the two words we use internally at Grammarly all the time: transparency and control. We want to be open with you about where your data is going, and we want to give you control over what's happening on a feature by feature basis. So your vendor should be able to do that on one side. On the security side, There are emerging kind of AI security standards, a new ISO standard for that. Of course, things like SOC 2, HIPAA, FedRAMP, these are all indicators that a vendor has a third party auditing. It's very hard for an individual to kind of go in and make sure we're following security practices, but that's why these third-party certifications exist. We have auditors come in to Grammarly at all times of the year, inspecting all of our processes, all of our systems, and ensuring they meet best in class, right? And so your AI and software vendors should be able to disclose all of their different compliances and ensure that it's been audited by a respected third party.
Thank you, Luke. I think you totally covered it.
Yeah.
Tim, I'm seeing a lot of questions in here about avoiding hallucinations. Can you speak a little bit to that?
I spend a lot of time on this. Think of a hallucination as a guess that the LLM makes, an inference. That's what it's doing. It's inferring. So it makes a guess because it doesn't have the information ready to make a factually based statement. It's not making things up, it's guessing. Why? Because the master tuning of all the major LLMs is number one, be helpful. The best way to avoid hallucinations is the same way as a parent, you avoid your kids doing stupid stuff. You give them more context. So the more time that you take to create that document that gives them all the context they need, the less the LLM has to guess. I mentioned before, Tim, GPT, the hardest part wasn't writing the prompt. The hardest part was creating this massive text document where I took 100 examples of what good looks like and said, study that first so that you know what you're dealing with Tim GPT. So it no longer had to guess what a good article on AI would be to suggest to me. It knew. So take more time to provide more context. I love enterprise versions of GPT because you can actually give it your internal data and tell this large language model, look at that and only that. Don't go look at the internet. That's a good way to think about driving down hallucinations. The last thing I would just say, though, is that what we call hallucinations is in the human world what others call creativity. So data scientists say that sometimes they make amazing discoveries that are completely novel. So let's always consider the value of inference and LLMs too as being a creative partner because they're really good at pattern recognition. But anyway, give it enough context and it no longer has to guess. Have it go feed on the general internet based on a great question. You might get some answers you don't like. Let me tell you one last little itty bitty thing. One of the things we've learned about how OpenAI works in distributing compute to the test time of when it's producing an answer is if you raise the stakes, don't abuse this, but if you raise the stakes and say, my job, my credibility with this group will depend on the accuracy of your answer, it will commit more compute time to fact check itself. Sometimes what I've done is I ask ChatGPT for an answer, and then I take the answer and I go to Claude and I say, you are a Snopes fact checker. Tell me what's wrong with what I heard from this one. So they call that AI on AI or adversarial AI. That's a great way to use multiple systems to get an accurate result.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you both for answering questions, and Luke for answering the ones in the chat. And audience, thank you so much for all of your questions. So we are just about ready to wrap up. You should see a survey in the chat. So we would love for you to take a second to give us your thoughts on this session. We will be following up by email with a recording of the session. And finally, if you want to stay in touch, please follow Grammarly on social and sign up for our Responsible AI newsletter on LinkedIn. All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today, and have a great rest of the day.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Thanks. Yeah, thanks, everybody. This was fun.